Yes, sorry about the choppiness and the trying to find a good spot, everyone. So I'm Dafna Gutkind. Yes, so I work for the Department of Education and the Office of Students in Temporary Housing. So I work
That's
with
okay.
students who essentially, oh, we see me being fuzzy, but we hear me. Okay, primarily hearing is more important. So I hope that's okay. Sorry about this. So I work with students who have experienced a lot of trauma and are living in the shelter system. Primarily, some of them are doubled up living with other families due to being homeless. So that's what I do in my day job, as they call it. And I also have a private practice to treat adults and children with depression and lots of different types of things like that. I've had a lot of different experiences working with agencies, in clinics, different types of roles that I've played, working with different populations and in different settings. So here I am, and I had the wonderful opportunity to meet Rebecca, and we were able to set up this live. And thank you so much, Rebecca, for this opportunity. And I'm really excited to be on here today with everyone. This is not an easy time, just in general, and just giving like a small shout out to everybody who's just here. That's about all you have to do to really be doing well in this time, right? It's not about, being perfect. It's not about, being the most productive, being, doing the most. It's really just about getting through it. It's a really difficult time for everybody in different ways, based on everybody's circumstance and situation. And I hope everybody just manages and gets through it, and hopefully all together we'll all get through it sooner rather than later. Basically me and a little bit about the current state of the pandemic. Should I get straight into my topic?
That goes right into our topic, right? Well, it kind of flows.
Yes,
right?
It does, actually. It does. So I was actually posted something, and I was saying how it's so important everyone's experience during this time, right? Oh no, wait, now? Can you hear me now? I can try to move again. 1 second. Hold on.
I'm the type of person who really doesn't.
Is this a better spot?
Like, I like to push myself through things.
Do you think this is a better spot?
Maybe, yeah.
What?
Well, I can hear you
Okay, so I'm
clearer.
going to try here.
Yes.
Okay, good.
Okay.
So basically, we all have different situations during this pandemic, and some people are having it, just different, are having it hard in so many ways. Maybe some people are not, getting out, they're bored, they're feeling more depressed and just as usual. Maybe some people are overwhelmed and stressed because they have too much responsibility. They're feeling more overwhelmed and anxious from that end. So many different perspectives of how people are feeling and what people are dealing with, and each of them are valid in their own way. So we're here to talk about validation, and validation is about understanding each person's perspective and how they experience it. The stress of this pandemic, but it doesn't matter. My way, your way, his way, they're all valid and they're all real, and we have to validate each other for the experiences that we experience, whether or not we have that same experience, right? So I may not have the same experience as you, but I can still validate your experience in this situation. So that definitely does connect. And I want to start just by actually going back to the basics. What is validation? So validation, actually, dictionary definition is recognition or affirmation of that a person or their opinions and feelings are valid and worthwhile. So that's the definition. So we all know what validation means, right? But that is really a very specific definition of what it means. It's a person or their beliefs being considered to be worthwhile or valid by somebody else. So I wanted to start with a small part about, the main part of this presentation is about validation and its crucial role in therapy, but I want to start out by talking about just a general importance of validation in general. So before we get to the therapeutic part, does validation play a role in our lives as a whole, right? So of course it does. Validation plays a role in our lives because it plays a role in all of our relationships. So I'm going to give some examples just to kind of try to help you understand that. So let's start with talking about a person and their spouse or their partner. Does validation play a role there? Yes, very much so, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we all need validation in our intimate relationships, right? So in EFT, right? If you guys remember a while back, Efrat Turk did an excellent demonstration about EFT, right? So the therapist validates each person, person in the relationship, part of the couple, their experiences, sometimes from childhood, right? And understanding their primary emotions and their triggers and how that's impacting the negative cycles that they're getting into with their partner, right? So there's that validation. And the ultimate goal is for each partner to be able to validate the other person's experience and triggers on their own and be able to see how that contributes to the negative behavior in order to come up with some solutions to help, fix those problems that are causing the strains in the marriage, right? So ultimately, there's a lot of validation there. And just on a general basis, we all know, right? Our spouse, our partner, they're looking for validation from us, right? When we come home, when we say we had a hard day, we're looking for them to validate us, for them to say, wow, that's so hard. What can I do for you? Not to be like, really? Was it that bad? Right? That's not going to be validating. And we're going to talk more about, what not to do and different things like that.
It seems like there's a lot of like what not to do. Like, I think like a lot of people learn patterns of speaking that are not validating and they don't even realize.
100%. And that's also something important to emphasize, right? Is someone a bad person when they're not validating? They just don't realize, right? Mm-hmm. People actually don't realize that they even can come from a good place but they're actually not validating you, making you feel horrible. Why? Because they don't understand what validation does and how they're not validating, right? So give an example. So let's go back to the spouse. The person comes home and said, I had a hard day, right? And the spouse is like, well, what happened at work? Let me tell you what you should do with your boss, right? And all they do is start coming up with the solutions, right? That is not validating. The person doesn't want to know what to do with their boss. The person doesn't want to know that they should go in 10 minutes earlier and go into the meeting or whatever. Like, they don't really care right now. Right now, I want you to be like, oh my God, that's so hard. Come sit on the couch, right? That's it. They don't want anything else.
I actually have a clip that I'm going to post right after this.
Yeah.
About, did you see that little clip with the woman with the nail in her head?
Yes, I love that. Yes. That is the most amazing.
Just look out for the post because it's really funny.
But that is hilarious. Yes. So it has a great example, right? So this woman has the nail in her head and her husband's like, and she's like, I don't know why I have such a bad headache and my head is killing me. And he's like, hello, you have a nail in your head. And she's like, no, because I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. It's just because you don't know what's going right. So it's this whole.
I just want you to hear me.
Right. I just want you to listen.
Your advice. I just need you to listen.
Right. Don't tell me anything. Don't say anything. Don't say a word. Don't say your solutions. And he's trying to tell her that she has a nail in her head, and she's just saying, no, you don't understand. Don't talk to me solutions. Don't tell me what to do. Just listen. Right. So that's a great example. Right. So and again, those people may be trying to be nice, right? To give that advice, right? But I just want you to do, to not be upset. So I'm going to tell you, right? But they're obviously invalidating you and making, you feel that you're not being heard. So similarly, let's give an example with a small child, right? So veering a little bit away from the couple relationship, right? We kind of understand pretty well how they could be invalidating, right? They're trying to give us solutions. They're trying to, or there's the one where they're like, but you have this. So it's great, right? So it's kind of like, oh, I had the worst day. I hate my job. But, your job is really close by and you make great money. So that's always good, right? So that could be great, but that's not what they want to hear, right? So it's kind of bringing up the positives. And the person could be very, very well-intended, right? By trying to bring up. Yeah, well-meaning, thank you. By trying to say like, oh no, but look, like, let's bring up the good parts. It's close by. You make good money. That's all great and well. And they're not trying to belittle the person's feelings. They're just, like you said, like they're unaware, right? So they're saying, oh, okay, so I'll just, you know, I'll just help them to see the good parts of it. Yeah, of course they have the bad parts of it, but I'll just come and help them see the good parts of it. But in reality, they don't want to hear that, and that's invalidating to them, especially in that moment.
But also, like, if, like, let's say right now with Corona, like with everybody kind of feeling like body dysregulation and just like foggy, like there's people are feeling symptomatic when, you know, when they're not normally, you know, anxious or depressed or anything like that.
Of course.
And like, you could say like, oh, well, thank God I have a job, right?
Right.
That I could do from anywhere, or I could work from home. But like,
Right.
does that take away the fact that you're really actually feeling these legitimate like symptoms that
Right. Or you're overwhelmed from working from home because it's
right.
not easy. But it's
But
like,
it
but you
doesn't
have
matter.
a job. Right. It doesn't
None
matter
of it
that
matters if you're having these symptoms, then
right.
you
If
feel
you're
the symptoms.
right. So you're getting paid, that's great, but you're feeling depressed, you're feeling anxious, you don't know what to do with yourself. So how is it helping you right now that you have the money? It's not
Right.
in that moment or with that feeling, it's not helping you. Exactly. It's a good example. So you don't, in that moment, you care about your own, you know, your own validation that you need, and you're not thinking about outside factors, and you don't want somebody else to bring up those outside factors. So let's kind of dumb it down to a little child, right? So a child comes home and the parent asks him, how's your day? And the kid says, well, I'm really sad because my friend didn't play with me at recess, right? So in the parent's minds, you know, okay, not the biggest deal of life, right? You'll probably move on and have a good life. But, you know, the child is sad, and the parent also feels uncomfortable with the child being sad, because who wants their child to feel sad? And who wants to feel sad that their child is sad, right? Because, of course, you're going to feel that pain with your child.
Mm-hmm.
So what's their automatic reaction? Oh, don't worry, sweetie, you'll play with them tomorrow. Don't be sad. It's all good.
Yeah. Oh,
right?
And you have lots of other friends.
Right. And didn't you play with that friend today? And you have a play date with that friend tomorrow, right? So everything's really all good in the friend department, right? So again, very well meaning, right? I don't want them to be sad. I don't want to be sad that they're sad. I just want everybody to be happy. And don't worry, you do have lots of friends. But that child in that moment feels sad. And for them to not have that feeling validated teaches them, so I guess I can't be sad, because my feelings of sadness are obviously not worthy, because I'm just being instructed to refocus them and just say, oh, well.
And they're visibly uncomfortable to you as the
right.
parent.
You, the parent, cannot handle my uncomfortable feelings,
right.
which actually may be true.
Right.
So, right. So how would I come to you with my feelings when you don't even know how to manage them? Right. Like, that's not going to work. And think about it as this manifests when they get older, right, to a little bit larger problems, right? So I've worked with many teenagers who are feeling depressed, who are feeling anxious, right? Like, who really experienced like a host of mental health issues. And the parents were like, all right, you're just dramatic. You just want attention. And you're just, you know, I've had kids telling me they were suicidal, right? Working with them in a school-based clinic. And the parent comes and said, she's fine. She's really just wants attention. And this is really not a big deal. She's very sensitive.
Oh,
so that's obviously, unfortunately, a very extreme case, right? So hopefully we're not reacting that within that extremes, but think about it in a little bit of a less extreme way, right? Your kid gets upset, and you're like, why are you upset? Why are you in a bad mood, right? Like, maybe a teenager. Well, and they start telling you something happened, and you're like, kind of roll your eyes, like, really? That's what's making you mad? Like, right? Something they're being dramatic, or oh, you're so dramatic, you're so sensitive, like, it's so not a big deal, right? You're just 100% invalidating them, right? And you may not even think that you're doing something so negative, right? But I'm just like,
so what's
all right.
the impact? Can you explain the impact of that? Like, because I think a lot of us grew up with the, like, oh, get over it. Oh my gosh, don't be such a baby. You know, like don't be so sensitive. You know, so what are the potential impacts? Like, why is it so important to learn validation?
So it's kind of like what we talked about before on the lower level, right?
Efrat loves you. She just wrote
thank
that.
you, Efrat. Love you too. Hi, everyone. So basically, right. So what does it do? So it's interesting because we talked about how it starts in such a low level, like, let's say a 3-4-year-old, right? How they come home and they say they're sad, right? So it could lead to so many different things. It could lead to repressing emotions, right? Because like you said, Rebecca, if my parent can't handle my emotions, I'm surely not going to divulge them to my parent. They can't handle it, right? So I'm probably going to repress my emotions. I'm probably going to have a lot of negative thoughts about myself, like, I'm crazy, I'm overly sensitive, right? These type of cognitive distortions that ultimately can manifest itself into depression, into anxiety, a lot of
I guess
different.
it's different at different ages, right? Like if you're not getting validated at different ages, then it would manifest differently.
Yes, definitely would manifest itself differently, and also based on your personality, the way that you translate into your world, right? That's very
Mm-hmm.
like different based on each person. But basically, I'm basically thinking like this person can't handle my feelings, or my feelings are crazy, or my feelings are, I'm so sensitive. So obviously I can never say anything, about anything because I'm just going to be told, oh, come on, like seriously, right? So why would I ever say anything about how I feel, right? So definitely a lot of repression, definitely a lot of negative self-talk, definitely a lot of cognitive distortions that can brew year after year after year, right? So I worked with a lot of teenagers who are suicidal, who have a lot of cognitive distortions, based on their young child, right? Like, I'll never be good enough. I'll never, because they
Mm-hmm.
were kind of, I mean, this is veering a little bit differently, right? But they were never validated and accepted for who they were, right? So in different ways, it kind of comes out differently, right? And as an adult, it's going to affect your relationship. So either it's I can't communicate my feelings, right? Which is obviously going to cause trouble in a relationship, or it's going back to the whole EFT approach, right? So
Or
I get
coping skills also.
difficulty coping. You're
Like
asking?
different coping, like let's say like you numbing or
Definitely, you could experience numbing because you just don't want to experience your emotions at all, right? So
right.
it's not like you have those let's say in DBT, we're going to talk a lot more about DBT soon, right? So in DBT, distress tolerance skills, you learn to manage negative emotions, right? But and accept them and like legitimize them, right? But here it's like you said, you're kind of numbing them. You're not even thinking about them at all because you can't think of them. You're not supposed to think of them, right? So numbing yourself from emotions, detaching yourself from emotions. In severe cases, it can cause dissociation, which is, a trauma response where it's kind of like, I don't even feel anything anymore. I'm just not even here because, I'm not allowed to feel, right? That's an extreme, obviously, reaction. But yeah, it can cause a lot of different things. And in your relationship with maybe a spouse, right? If you're getting triggered by something that they do, right? Then how are you going to be able to tell them if in your head your thoughts are telling you that's so stupid? They're going to think it's stupid. Why would you tell them? Right? And in your relationships with anyone, honestly, right? Think about your relationships with a friend, right? You have a relationship with a friend, and you're not going to feel if you tell a friend something, right? You kind of divulge something to a friend, and the friend's like, really? That's why you're mad at me? Okay, let's just yeah, right? So they're going to kind of roll their eyes at you and mock you, right? You're probably not going to tell them when you're upset again, and that friendship is probably never going to be the same, right? So there's a lot of different ways that they can invalidate. Or what about the, when you vent to a friend, right? So you're telling a friend, the friend says, how are you, right? And you're like, let's say you say, this is my good friend, I can really, say how I really am doing. So you kind of talk about how you're overwhelmed, things are going on, right? And they kind of like, so again, this is like the same parent as we spoke about before. This friend might be well meaning, but they can't handle feeling distress and feeling that you're in distress because you're their friend. So it could be coming from a good place. Let's give them that. But then they can't handle it. So instead of being like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. That's so hard. Like, what can I do for you? Right. Like, but you have this. So that's good. Right. And you're like,
I also like I notice myself sometimes and I have to stop myself because I'm like a fixer type of person. So I'll try to like brainstorm solutions to
right.
problems.
And it's because you care. Like, you want to help them. Like, no, I don't
Right.
want to see you like this. I want to help you. So a lot of times it really does come from a good place.
Right.
But we have to remember in that moment that person needs something different. That person needs like you to just not give them the suggestion, just be like, oh my God, that's terrible, right? Like
even as a parent also, because like I think like
right.
even like I with one of my kids, I know that every time I've like held back from trying to fix their problem and just listened and validated how hard it was, and then I'm so sorry that you're going through that, and like they're like craving that I fix it for them, like they're like begging me to fix it and I can't fix it, and it's always been the most powerful experiences for them because they have to learn how to fix it.
Right.
They have to learn for themselves, and I think in the end they respect it more than if I were to have fixed it.
Right. Because you're being there for them in that moment of the pain, and you're
I mean,
validating that experience.
older kids, I don't know if younger kids will like appreciate that as much, but maybe they
Right. Well, they can recognize it more when they're older, how that process works. Yeah, for sure. Definitely. It's very hard. It's really hard. So again, it's really hard. And well-meaning people who are nice, caring people can invalidate accidentally. And that's the whole point of just educating yourself about it. So this is really more about, you know, in general, how does validation affect us in general in our lives, right? Within our relationships with our friends, right? Or let's talk about, you know, with a boss, right? Rebecca, you and I discussed this like really briefly when I was telling you about my topic, right? So the person comes to their boss and says like, maybe they're overwhelmed with, you know, the workload or whatever's going on, and the boss is like, so you can't manage your workload, so maybe we have to like, maybe this is not working out, you know, right? So the boss is, instead of validating them, okay, like, you know, I'm so sorry your feelings, wait, thank you for telling me, you know, and kind of sitting with them in that, like, you know, it's okay to get overwhelmed, and just validating their experience. They're kind of like already like looking, you know, they're on ZipRecruiter hiring their next candidate, right? So, you know, they're not able to give them that validation. Like, it's normal to get overwhelmed at work. So it's an okay thing. It doesn't have to be this, you know.
And also, but the boss adding that pressure rather than like giving 5 minutes to work it through actually makes the problem worse rather than better.
Right, because the boss is probably perpetuating the stress. So that's a whole other story we can get to another time. But yeah, definitely. So it's this lack of validation in general. Like, we kind of jump to like either solutions or, you know, just different things instead of just validating that person for what they're going through. And what they're going through is real. And even if it may not seem, you know, like it makes sense to me as the person validating, it doesn't matter. I'm validating you on how you feel. I may not feel that way. I may not fully understand why you feel the way that you feel, because I'm not you ultimately, right? As much as I'm so compassionate towards you, I'm not you. But I'm making my best effort to, you know, put myself in your shoes and to really feel for you. So we kind of covered sort of just in general how it affects our relationships with our spouses, with our children, with our employers, with our friends. Validation is just a huge part of social interaction, pretty much, if you think about it, right? It's just such a huge component. So we can all really use this to just educate ourselves a little bit more about the importance of validating each other, even the personal people in our lives, right? This is just the personal people, and how much validation is impacted on a daily basis by, you know, the words that we say to people, the responses that we have with people who come talk to us, and different things like that. So it's really important. But we also want to get to why it's important in the therapeutic process. So we're going to kind of shift over a little bit to that. So why is it important in the therapeutic process? Okay, good question. Well, before we get to that, I want to talk about something that some people might have been thinking about. So why do we have to go to therapy? Listen, I'm going to go on Amazon. I'm going to order some self-help books. I'm going to learn some CBT and DBT. You know, I'm going to sign up for a course. I can do that too, even if I'm not a therapist. And I'm just going to help myself. I mean, simple as that, right? Why do I need to, you know, put myself out there to this person who's going to be my therapist? What's the point, right? So
is that rhetorical?
Yes, it's rhetorical. So obviously, as we can see, that the point is probably going to be related to the topic of the day, that you're missing the validation piece, right? So one of the most important things in the therapeutic relationship, did you want to answer the question, Rebecca? One of the most important things in the therapy, okay, because I would have let you if you wanted to.
I just wanted to make sure like you weren't expecting an answer from me.
Oh, okay, fine. No pressure, Rebecca. Don't worry. I'm not putting you on the spot.
Okay. No quizzes.
So one of the most important things in the therapeutic relationship is this validation, right? So in the therapeutic process, validation is huge, right? So the reason why I'm going to a therapist, why anyone is going to a therapist, is because they need that other person on the other side of the chair of the office to validate them, right? To understand their experiences and give them that validation that unfortunately they may not be getting from other people in their life. But even if they are getting it in different, you know, bits and pieces from different people in their life in different ways, this is one person who's validating every single experience in their life, right? What's going on with them at work, what happened to them as a child, what's going on with their friends, what's going on, you know, with every single aspect of their life. This is somebody who's going to know most things that go on in their life and be able to validate every single aspect. And that is so powerful. So that experience.
Well, technically, like I can learn to validate myself.
So that's where I'm going to challenge you, right?
There's an added component though, because there's also that connection piece, right?
Right. So it's part of the relationship, right? So it's that human connection, right? So you can validate yourself with your thoughts, right? So I can tell myself, I'm great, I can do this, right? You can, it's kind of like giving yourself positive self-affirmations. You can do that. It's super helpful. But are you going to really be able to validate yourself in a way that you can attain from a human person sitting next to you and saying, I hear you, I validate you, and I accept you for who you are? It's hard. It's pretty hard to do it to yourself. So that's the whole point. So we need that connection, like you said, Rebecca, the human connection. And that human connection is also about getting that, getting the validation through the relationship, right? So I'm gonna give an example. So, well, first, hold on. So my question is now, what if, you know, a person is displaying negative, dangerous behaviors? Am I, the therapist, going to then go and validate them for doing those things? So it's a good question. And the answer is yes. And why? Because validation is not agreement. So validation to some people sounds like agreement, right? I validate you. Yes, of course I agree with you, but that's actually not what it is. Validation is not I agree with you. Validation is I understand why you did what you did, why you feel the way you feel, and how you're experiencing what you're experiencing, right? I'm not actually agreeing with you necessarily. So I have a little bit of an extreme example that's kind of helpful to display this point. So Charles Swenson, who is a DBT trainer and facilitator of different DBT trainings, he's kind of an expert in DBT. He trained with Marsha Linehan. By the way, everyone, DBT is dialectical behavior therapy, a very popular therapy used to help primarily people who are emotionally dysregulated, have trouble regulating their emotions. So he gave an example in his training, which I attended, about one of his patients who he was seeing at an inpatient psychiatric unit in a hospital. And this patient was brought in because she was, I believe, an adolescent female, and she was found on the roof of her home, swinging from some sort of antenna or pole, singing songs from the West Side Story. This is where she was found by the police. And she was brought to the hospital and was interviewing with Charlie, who was the therapist. So he talks about, how can I validate this experience, right? This is dangerous. This is reckless. I do not want her to do this again. So how can I validate her, right? So he talks about finding the validity in things that seem like they can't be validated, right? Seems like, oh, that's kind of crazy, but I'm going to find the validity in that. So he asked her, why did you do what you did? And she actually had a story, right? As most people do, right? We don't really just do things for no reason. So it's about understanding why the person did what they did to find the validity. So he asked her, what happened? Like, what led you to where the police found you, and what happened? So her parents were fighting. They were in some sort of domestic violence situation. They would fight frequently, physically, emotionally. I'm not sure exactly the situation. Obviously, you know, this is a story I'm hearing from him. And she couldn't take it anymore. And she went onto the roof and she was screaming these songs to distract herself so she wouldn't hear what was going on. And she actually had a few goals in mind. Number one, she wanted to get out of the house because she didn't want to be present in that, you know, terrible situation. Number two, she actually wanted to go to the hospital because she thought that she can get away and she can get the help that she needed. So her goal, she knows the police are going to be called and she's going to the hospital. That was her goal. She wanted to go to the hospital. And number three, she wanted some attention to be given to her parents' situation, that this is going on in their home. So police showing up at the door is probably going to accomplish all those three things, right? So now
that's pretty logical.
Right. Now that you're like, oh, that kind of makes sense, actually, right? So was it a dangerous and reckless thing to do? Yes. And does he want to perpetuate those type of behaviors? No, but he's still able to validate and say, oh, wow, I totally understand why you did what you did, and I understand how you felt, and I understand what your goals were and why you were doing that and why that helped you to achieve those goals that you had in mind.
And
so
how and then he probably continued with, like, how how could we accomplish the same goals in a healthier way?
100%.
Right.
That's going to be after.
Right.
But the first initial part is, how can I validate you? And the point is that even something dangerous or even something reckless can be validated because a person had a reason for doing it, and they have a perspective how they felt and why they acted how they acted. It's valid for them. It's real. Even if it's not necessarily the smartest thing to do, it's still real. So that's just an extreme case of how you can really validate anything, right? Or anyone, and you're not necessarily agreeing, right? So as a therapist, we're going to talk a little bit more about this later, but as a therapist, right, you want your clients to change, to grow, right, to better themselves. But before we get to any of that, you need that relationship and that validation. So am I going to open up to a therapist and ask them to help me to change this about my life or this about my life before I trust them, before I feel that they understand me, that they validate me, that they accept me for who I am no matter what? No. So before, of course, the goal of therapy is also change, right? Of course, you go to therapy to accomplish goals and to work on yourself and to, make changes in your life to lead a better life, of course. But that's going to happen later on. You have to go through the engagement process. You have to go through the trust process. You have to go through the process of being validated, being understood, being heard, being accepted by this person before you can get to any of that. So CBT actually emphasizes 6 levels of validation. So we understand validation in therapy is so crucial, but how do you validate, and what are the ways of being validated? So there are 6 levels of validation. So we're going to start with level 1, most basic, but extremely important. The therapist has to be awake, aware, and be listening to the person, right? No distractions, nothing like that. So awake, we hope the person's awake. We really do. But we mean a little bit more than awake, right? With their eyes open. We mean they're vitalized, they're energized, they have a body language that they're, attentive, they're leaning into you, they're listening, they're not distracted with things on their desk or, with something else. They're really there, they're listening, they're attentive to you, and they're present, right? You really can tell that they're present because you can always tell when someone's present. So they're there, they're present, they're with you. Step number 1. Okay. Step number 2 is accurate reflection. So accurate reflection is, I'm going to repeat back to you what you said. So you want to avoid kind of acting like a parrot. You don't want to be like, well, I think that you said this, and this, exactly in the same words as them, which can sound kind of condescending. That's not what you're looking for. But you're accurately reflecting what they said, right? So I'm going to give an example to get us through the stages, right? So if I'm accurately reflecting the situation with my client, she's really, her sister divulged to the whole family some things that she told her in confidence. So I'm going to accurately reflect how, what happened. So you're telling me that your sister actually told your whole entire family all those things you told her in private, and you trusted her to keep it confidential, right? Like, I'm being real, I'm being authentic, right? But I'm pretty much repeating what she told me, right? And I'm acting interested and engaged. So I'm repeating what they said to clarify or to just show that I'm listening, right? I know what you said because I'm repeating, and you can tell that I know what you said. Step number 3 is, I'm going to actually take it a step further, and I'm going to actually guess what you might be feeling. So not only am I telling you, I know that your sister did that, I'm going to say, I'm sure you must be furious that your sister talked about all those private things in front of the whole family, right? So I'm guessing. I could be wrong. Maybe you're not furious. Maybe you're embarrassed. Thank you. Shamed, whatever. There's so many things that you could feel. Thank you for the assist, Rebecca. But yes, you could be feeling so many different feelings. But in this moment, I'm just guessing that you might be furious. So I'm going to take it a step further and not just accurately reflect, but I'm going to guess how you feel. I'm sure you must be furious that your sister would do that. So that's level 3 of validation, right? So I'm getting closer to really zoning in on your feelings and feeling them almost for you, right? Validation number 4 is, I'm going to validate how that must feel based on your history. What does that mean? So as your therapist, I probably know a lot about your history, right? About your childhood, about things like that. So I happen to know your relationship with your sister has always been tough. And last year, you had this whole talk with your sister. You guys talked. You told her how much things that she did bothered you. You told her you feel like you can't trust her. And your sister literally told you, you were making up. And your sister said, I promise you I will never betray your trust again. You can trust me. We're on a new, playing field now. We're, getting along. We're going to, start over in our relationship. So you can trust me. So based on me knowing that from last year, then I can't imagine how you're feeling now after that, right? So based on the history with you and your sister's promise that she would never betray you, I can imagine how horrible you feel right now, right? So I'm taking it a step further. Then I'm guessing how you feel also in a sense, but I'm taking it further because I'm adding your history to the context of what happened, right? So this is a terrible thing, but it's so much more terrible because your sister told you could trust her and you were mending your relationship. So I'm adding that component that I now know because I've discussed this with you already, and I'm adding it to this conversation to show you that I remember, and I also know that's probably exasperating how upset you feel at her because of that, right? So you're probably feeling even more furious because of that, that promise that she made to you and your repair of your relationship, which has obviously been betrayed, right? So that's level 4. Now, level 5 is normalizing, right? So in general, I'm just going to normalize. Anybody would feel like that in that situation. You're not crazy. You're not the only person. You're not just talking to me about your personal situation with your sister, and anybody else would be fine with that. Anybody would be mortified, furious, feel horrible if their sister disclosed private things after promising that they could trust them. Like anybody would feel horrible in that situation. And I don't blame you at all for feeling that way. And nobody else in the world will blame you for feeling that way because that's the most normal reaction that you're having right now, right? So that makes a person feel, not only does my therapist understand, but globally, anybody would feel that way. And you kind of feel like, I'm normal. This is okay for me to feel this way. Anybody would feel the same way. It's a really comforting type of feeling. And that's why it's a higher level of validation. And the very last level of validation, the 6th level, is called radical genuineness. And radical genuineness is actually very interesting. It's about being real with a person, with your client, right? On a very personal, equalized level. So it's kind of like it's kind of doing something that you may not ordinarily do as a therapist. You're kind of leveling yourself out with them, and you're kind of like, I'm just like you, right? And you're telling me this, and I'm agreeing with you, and I'm validating you on a level that I'm not your therapist right now. I'm just anyone, and like, I totally get you, right? So it's kind of like putting down that like persona of like very boundary, very therapist-y, and just kind of like being like, oh my God, right? And I can't believe that happened to you, right? As like kind of like almost personal, like how you would do to a friend maybe. Mm-hmm. And there are different ways you can do that. Like maybe you can make a joke like, oh my God, I would kill my sister if she did that to me, right? Like just kind of trying to like the mood, but that ultimately shows them how much you validate that experience, how bad it was, right? Or it's kind of like sometimes people self-disclose. So like, I know how it feels to be betrayed, and it's terrible. Like it's really the worst experience in the world, right? So you're disclosing something that's trying to make it more personal, more real. You're being radically genuine, right? So that's the last level of validation. So the fact that there are so many levels, right, is interesting. And you see that in each level, it just gets more and more kind of connected to the person and to making them feel that their experience is valid in different ways. So it's like, I could understand how you feel. Your history makes a difference. Anyone in the world would feel that way. I feel that way as, even like almost like a friend. And in so many different aspects, they feel validated. So, of course, not every single therapist at every single moment is going to be displaying these 6 levels, right? It's definitely something to strive for, right? And it's something that, therapists can be aware of to really try to incorporate more, right? So, of course, every therapist wants to validate, and it's a big part of therapy to validate, but it's really getting to these really core elements of validation that's really important, and a lot of therapists can incorporate, and it could be really helpful. And just in general, it's kind of back to the first rhetorical question, right? So all these things that the therapist is doing for you within these 6 levels is not something that you can do for yourself. It's really not, because it's about your, now that you
it's about the connection.
Yeah, it's about the connection. It's about that person being in your shoes, being in your history of your life, being in their history of their life, being in the world's history, and understanding how anyone would perceive the situation. There's so many different ways that it's manifesting itself. And it's kind of like, I can't do that on my own. And that's kind of why the validation is so important to the therapeutic relationship. And we talked in the beginning, not the beginning, but in the middle, about when I was talking about Charlie's example of that client, right? So, and you, Rebecca, said that after the validation takes place, of course, they're going to probably talk about some more adaptive ways to, that they could have handled that situation. So it's like I was saying earlier, you go to therapy because you want to change and you want to grow, and that will happen. And your goals are super important, and you're not going to just be validated and that's it and come out the same person that you went in. That's not going to be helpful to you. But the point is that how are you going to get to the change the change process is ugly. It's uncomfortable. It's ugly. It's
You're not always going to like your therapist.
100% true. That's also true. Well, that's
like, it's not important. All about validation. I mean, that's like the first step in the relationship, right? Like, that's important to establish a relationship in that way. But there are so many times where, like, like I've heard so many people say that that like if they didn't love their therapist so much, they would hate their therapist. And Rachel Tuffman once said that you found the right therapist when something about crying, where like you have to cry for sure, or something about that when they call you out on your.
Yes, 100%. They're supposed to call you out on your behaviors, because then they're not your therapist and they don't want to help you, right? So of course, validation, I'm talking about it and kind of blowing it out of proportion for the emphasis of it, because it's our topic. But 100%, if your therapist is sitting there and validating you all day long and telling you everything you do is amazing, then you are not going to be able to accomplish. Has to call you out. Your therapist has to be like, but we talked about this. You're not supposed to be doing this. Remember, right? In a nice way, in a they
find the dance, the balance, and
right. So I think this is like, so speaking of like a dance, this is one part of it, right? So there's one part that's like, I'm validating you, I'm with you, I'm on your side, right? It's kind of like I'm your person, right? So I'm your person, I'm here for you, I'll always take your side, right? So it's kind of like you never have the fear that when you go to therapy and you say something, that person's going to be like, right? You have to be, maybe later that's going to come, right? So it's important to know that Rachel's not wrong, of course. That will come. But in that moment, it's, I'm with you. You feel that way? You're feeling hurt, you're feeling upset. I hear you, I feel you, I'm with you. But later on, of course, you're going to have to challenge them, right? If we don't challenge, our clients, then they won't be able to grow and to change and to, get better, right? So yes, you were so right after, but you can hear it after you've been validated, right?
Also, so I think part of it is the therapist teaching the language of validation also, because a lot of people do not grow up with that language, with
100%,
with the ability to validate themselves, even if they wanted to, or they wouldn't even understand what it meant if they were told to validate themselves.
100%. And that's what a lot of like the inner child work is about, right? So inner child work is you didn't receive this validation or this care or this treatment when you were young, when you needed it, but you can give it to yourself as an adult looking back. Because those triggers are going to come up again, but now you're an adult and now you have more knowledge and now you have more power, and you can use that knowledge and power to comfort yourself and validate yourself from the triggers and traumas of your past. So that's actually pretty much exactly what it's about. And it's super important. It's super important because it's just like ultimately a therapist's goal, the goal of therapy is to not need therapy, right? So you've been validated, you've been, encouraged, you've been, you have those feelings of somebody's with you, somebody's on your side, somebody understands you. Then you were able to get to the change process, right? With that, with that relationship, I was able to have the therapist call me out on,
Mhm.
my shortcomings, my, my maladaptive coping skills, right? Whatever, all the different things that I really want to change. So then they're able to call me out. I can take it from them because I know that they're there for me and they care about me and they validate me. We go through the process of change, difficult, challenging, but we're able to go through that process. And then ultimately, I know how to self-regulate. I know how to self-validate. I know how to, then you can start being your own
Mhm.
therapist at home, right? And that's the
Right.
goal, right?
Right.
Then at that point, you can use the strategies you learned. You can cope. You can use thought-changing strategies. You can give yourself the positive affirmations.
Mhm.
You can do the inner child work. When you get triggered, you can do all those things on your own, but
Mhm.
you're not going to get there when you haven't started. And
A lot of the self-help books, it's kind of like reading a different language until you've been through therapy.
right, how
Like,
are you supposed to know how to do it?
I'm sure I read like a million self-help books before I went to therapy, and then once you actually really learn it, then it's like you're reading these books again with a different lens, like with a much clearer perception, and you're understanding. Like, I really don't think I understood what validation meant until I learned it.
Right, of course. So you're it's like how you wouldn't um you wouldn't, if you didn't have the background and the knowledge of something, you don't just do it. Just like a therapist who's never went to school, never had training, right, is not going to just be
Mm-hmm.
a therapist, right? So it's the same thing being a therapist for yourself. When you don't have the training, when you don't have the knowledge, when you don't have the understanding, once you do, you can use the knowledge and the understanding and the experience that you've attained to then help yourself, and then to be able to use those skills and techniques when you're ready on your own. Of course, that's the ultimate goal, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you really, that validation piece is just so important. And I think it's interesting what you were saying about, I'm not sure if you were saying this, but you were saying about liking your therapist, right? What is liking your therapist about, right? Liking your therapist is very important, right? So again, you're not going to get to that change process in a good way if you don't like your therapist. If I don't have a good rapport, if I don't feel
Mm-hmm.
comfortable, I'm not going to be happy when you tell me, why are you doing this, right? Even if you're saying it in that nice, balanced dance way, I'm not going to appreciate it from
Mm-hmm.
you because we don't have a good relationship. But I think part of the relationship solidifying is giving the validation. It doesn't mean that every single person is a match to every single therapist. That's not true, 100%.
Right.
You need to find the therapist that's your match for your personality, for your background, maybe, whatever you feel. You obviously have to have that, that comfortability and that, just that bond, that connection, right? It's a chemistry, right?
Mm-hmm.
So of course you need to have that, and that's so important. But part of, I guess, cultivating that, right? So once you do have someone that could be a good match for you, cultivating that comfortability and that, bond could, basically validation is part of that process, right? So once that you do find the right person, you still need them to, to validate you and to, engage with you and to develop that positive rapport to strengthen it enough to continue on to the next piece, right? So even a great therapist who you even like and you kind of like feel connected to and kind of, you feel similar enough to, or whatever, made you comfortable with choosing them, is you're not going to, succeed with that unless you're really being validated and being heard. If you don't feel heard or validated, you can like them all you want, but you're not going to get that same experience out of it. And I feel that the validation is giving you the, the readiness to really, to really work on the rest, right? Because think about it. Why would anyone listen to anyone who they don't feel understands them,
Mm-hmm.
accepts them, and validates them? They won't. And I don't blame them.
Well,
They
I think that
shouldn't.
that's also an issue in schools, like with teachers and like kids not behaving. And I think that oftentimes it's the relationship between the teacher and the student
100%.
that's the issue. And it's not like the student, like the same student could be an angel in one class and then is like a terror in another class because the teacher needs to cultivate that relationship.
100%. And I work in a school and I have a lot of experience with this. I try to teach teachers about seeing the clinical perspective of these children, especially the ones that I work with that are coming from really high levels of trauma. And some of the teachers sort of feel like I'm giving them an excuse Like, oh, you're just saying that it's okay for them to behave this way. And I'm like, listen,
I
I am
actually
not.
have that as a question for, finish your thought and then I'll.
Okay, so I do not condone children's behavior and tell them it's okay for you to act this way, right? They need to learn that that's not okay. And, that has to be emphasized and that has to be understood. But at the same time, I'll give an example. I had a boy I'm currently working with now, remote learning, very difficult. Anyways, he is a third grader, experienced a lot of trauma living in a shelter, a lot of different things in his history. And he was having trouble with another student in his class. The other student was being mean to him and making comments about his family and different things that he was really hurt from. And what he did to kind of cope with that is he just misbehaved in class so that he could just distract himself and just not think about all these hurtful comments that were being thrown at him. So, the teacher's getting so angry and he's just goofing around and he's so much trouble and he's a bully and blah, blah, blah. So I take him out. I'm like, what's going on? And he's like, and obviously not only do I have a relationship with him, but I also have a history with him of talking about emotions. So he's able to talk about his emotions with me because we already have that in our language and in our repertoire. So I said, like, what are you feeling? Like, what's going on? And he's like, oh, I'm just feeling really sad because he's saying really mean things about my mom and my family. And how like I have to cope with it and I have to distract myself. So I'm just goofing off. I know my teacher's really mad at me, but I don't know what else to do. Right?
That makes sense.
And to me, I'm like, okay, that makes sense. I'm like, can we agree that we have to find a better way so you're not disrupting the class? And he's like, yeah. And we found a better way and everything was good. And the teacher actually came over to me the following week and said how much his behavior has improved. Am I going to say that his behavior will be perfect the rest of the year forever and ever on? No. But when you deal with it in that type of way and you understand the emotions and the clinical impact, right, you're going to be able to solve the problem and you're going to be able to deal with it in a much more effective way.
Mm-hmm. So I was actually talking to somebody about this and she said that I should bring it up on this live actually, because she was saying that this was like pre-corona, but I knew that we were going to be talking about this for a while,
right? Quite a while.
So she was saying that she was having a meeting with somebody in school that that the student in the something about how there was a student in the class who was being picked on, and the teacher, he didn't feel protected in the class, and one of the parents was like, oh my gosh, like and like they were advocating for the kid to have a safe place to go to if they needed a place. And so the other parent, who was like, I guess, I don't know why the other parent was involved, but they said something like, all we're doing is like creating a bunch of like kids who have no resilience and like they can't like defend themselves, and they have to they're like wusses, and like parents who are like
I know those parents. Yeah, 100%. So here's what I'll say to answer the question.
I tend to want to be one of those. I think my natural tendency is to be one of those parents, and I really have to fight it hard. Like, come on, you could do it. Get up. Like, just like.
So right, but it happens to be there's good to both sides. So
right.
here's the both sides, right? So you want your kids to have skills, right? So it's what we were talking about before. We don't want to solve all our problems for our kids because then they'll never learn problem-solving skills. That's a huge skill that they need to learn as an adult, right? So it's always this balance, right? And it's kind of like, there's a great book called Positive Discipline. And it's actually, it's a book that could be applied either to the classroom or to parenting, kind of both, just dealing with children. And the kind of one of the mantras in the book is kind but firm. And I always see that as like something, in the book, the discipline kind of describes like that balance between not letting kids get away with things, right? Because then they learn they can do whatever they want. They become spoiled. They become bratty. They become, whatever. And then there's also that kindness that you need, right? You need that kindness. If you don't have that kindness,
safe.
Right. So So I'm saying like the kindness, which is like the other extreme. And in here, we're talking about the safety, right? The kid needs to feel safe. So whether or not, yes, he has to learn to toughen up. Yes, there are times when kids who often get bullied need to kind of stand up to the bully, and they have to learn skills to be able to do that. And I've definitely worked with kids who are often bullied and said, what does the bully say to you? What can you say back to them, right? Yes, you do need to learn how to kind of not let it get to you and learn how to respond to it 100%. But at the same time, if a kid is not feeling safe, that's never okay, right? So it's like kind of like that balance. And teaching a kid what to do when they're not okay is a skill, by the way. So if I'm a kid and I know that I need to, like, I'll tell kids, if you feel like no one's listening to you on the yard or in the classroom, tell them you want to talk to me. I'm here, right? So I may not be with you in your classroom, but you can always say,